I'm David Thiel, and this is my first time here, so be gentle. The first time I ever went to a similar thing like this was last year. I went to the one in Vegas, and they have somewhat of a different focus. For you guys, this is all about you, and so I'll try to do what I can to focus it on you, because this is all about your enthusiasm for these things. And I'll tell you what I know about how these things came to be from my perspective. Which, is this gonna work? No, it's not. So, it is. It's just got a delay. Okay, and my perspective is from development, game development, done in Chicago. When people think about this, they think about game development much further west. They think about Atari. They think about across the Pacific Ocean and Nintendo. We don't think all that much about developers in Chicago, but there were a bunch of us. I'm going to give it one more try, and then I'm going to give up on this. Okay. Now, everybody has an origin story. Where did your interest start in this kind of thing? And my story starts with this. I'm old, and I graduated from college in 1972. So when I graduated, I didn't pursue my degree. Instead, I pursued my passion and became a musician. And I played all the time in bars and in lounges. And shortly after getting into that, a former roommate from college became my roommate, and for fun, we visited a bowling alley, which had one of these, right? Everybody knows what this is? Computer space, yeah. And it was really hard to play. But we figured out if you divided left, right, thrust, and fire between two people, so one person was in charge of steering, and the other person was in charge of thrusting and firing, we could play it a lot longer. And my passion started here.
I want to go to Italy.
My other passion, playing music, was paying the bills. And that is, in fact, me in the lower right-hand corner. Thinner, younger. In the bars that I worked in, we would play 45-minute sets, maybe 4 or 5 of those, and so we would get 15-minute breaks. And in a lot of those bars, rock and roll bars and stuff, they would have video games. And so I was continuing to pursue my other passion on my breaks. And that was one of my favorite. Who knows what that is? Somebody said depth charge. Absolutely. Depth charge, and from like 1977. And I love that game. I eventually tried to program that on the Trash 80. But eventually being a musician full-time became harder and harder. It's sort of like buggy whips, and we were subject to automation and people with amplifiers and playing records and stuff. Disco hit, and being in rock and roll bands and playing 5 nights a week, even in an area as big as Chicago, was really becoming tough. So I switched to becoming a programmer, and I trained at an insurance company, and I was working on mainframes. But my passion was at home, where I had an Apple II computer, and I was hacking and programming games and doing stuff, and I really liked that a lot better, and I would do anything to get out of trying to get things done on a mainframe, because it was very bad. And I knew that micros were going to be important, and I wanted to get a gig. So some headhunter, maybe they wanted to get rid of me, somebody told a headhunter I was doing this, and gave my name to a pinball company who was starting a video game division. Because in that time, pinball machines were getting hammered by Space Invaders. And it was getting harder and harder in America to sell. You couldn't give away a pinball machine. Most of them were going to Europe in that 79 to 89 time frame. The other majors, Bally and Williams, had already jumped. And Bally Midway solved their problem by licensing good games from Japan. Taito made Space Invaders, Namco made Pac-Man. Williams did their own thing and developed Defender and did that in-house. I got the opportunity to join Gottlieb, which was the last of the major pinball companies in Chicago who were starting a video game division. Now, in that time, it was almost impossible to hire experienced video game programmers. Let's say you're a big corporation like Columbia Pictures, who happen to own Gottlieb, and say, hey, let's hire some really smart guys that make video games. Let's get these talented, experienced people. In America, in 1980, how many people had ever programmed a video game? Not a whole lot. But this guy did. By the time Gottlieb hired him, he had done 8 vector games at Cinematronics. And he did many firsts, including one of my favorite. He did Rip Off, which was the first 2-player cooperative games ever. He was also an artist. He did vector art and stuff. And he also did a cartoon book. Now that's Tim. His name is Tim Skelly, and that's his book. And in fact, if you contact me, I can put you in touch with Tim if you want to get one of these. For this crowd, I would think this is a real collectible, because this is a book all about the arcade game experience and the arcade game development experience done as funny stuff. And it's really good. Unfortunately, by the time it got published in '83, the whole arcade thing was going down, so I think Tim still has 1,000 of his books. Tim's first game for Gottlieb. It was called Reactor, and it was really great in the lab. We loved playing it. We thought it was going to be a huge hit. And because it was the first game that was finished, the corporation manufactured like 3,000 of them. It was not a huge hit. But it's still a lot of fun to play, and since there are 3,000 of them, they're out there, and if you can get your hands on try out especially if it's on free play, try a Reactor. It's a lot of fun. The problem with it was it required stealth and trickery. 2 things which 13-year-old boys are not particularly fond of doing. They want to fire and whack stuff. And if you do that with Reactor, you're going to be dead. So, and then there were more games that we made. The second one was called Various Things. It was supposed to be a Superman game, but they couldn't get the license, so then it was called Protector while I worked on it, and then marketing changed it to Guardian, and it just wasn't a good game, so it never got made. The third game, however, that we did was Got Out There. And that's the guy on the left is the programmer. His name's Warren Davis. He came from AT&T Bell Labs in Naperville, Illinois. He'd never done a video game before. He was brought in, he helped on Protector a little bit, and then saw some art that the guy on the right was doing, Jeffrey Lee, and he had a brainstorm and said, hey, I think we can make a game out of that. There you go. So Kubert got out there, but this talk is not so much about coin-op stuff. This is just, stuff, my early work. By '83, I could see the writing on the wall. First, I felt much abused working at a company for not that much money, and then they insisted on keeping a secret. So, going to a show like this is wonderful because there are people who want to know who did the games and who did what and stuff. In '83, it was corporate policy at Gottlieb not to let anybody know who worked on the games. And they did an interview for one of the game magazines, and we had to use pseudonyms. So Warren was D. Ziner, Jeff Lee was R. Teast, and I was J. Walkman. And that really irritated me because you do this, I do this. I mean, it's all about, hey mom, look at me. You know, when you entertain, when you want to make people happy by doing something, you know, you do it because you have to, because you want to make people happy, but you want them to know you're making them happy. So it was time for a change. Plus, the coin-op market was going down. The economics of it were such that if one Pac-Man in a location made $100 a week, 10 Pac-Men would make $1,000 a week. So let's buy 100 Pac-Men. So the operators bought enormous numbers of Pac-Men, which for a while, you know, but they reached saturation. Now, they had spent all their money. So they weren't buying new games. And this is very bad for companies making games whose enterprise doesn't get them any money after they sell the game, right? People are still making money with some of those Pac-Men that were sold by Namco Williams 30 years ago. And, you know, Bally Midway is gone. It went out of business. So it's a bad business model to begin with. Further made bad for any weak times at all, sends companies out of business, like Gottlieb, which 6 months after I left, went away. So, meanwhile, I'm still a hobbyist and like to play games and stuff, so I bought this. No, I didn't. I don't have a picture of the other. Okay, I'm sorry. I bought a Fairchild Channel F. That was my game console. What an idiot choice. 250,000 people just like me bought it. I bought mine at Penny's, you know, your hardware, scientific hardware dealer of choice. And it was fun, you know, but it wasn't supported all that well. Earlier than this, in the late 70s, Bally, with all their money from Pac-Man, decided they wanted to get into the home game market. So they made the Astrocade. It was called several things, actually. And it was really a pretty nifty system. It was technologically superior to the Atari offering, the 2600, but it never really, it had problems. It overheated, and it came back. It was kind of a disaster. So the Astrocade and all the games they had went away. And why is that important? Well, all these games have something in common. Tapper, Cubert, Nibbler, Gorf. The electric keyboard is the place that I worked before I did Gottlieb, and we sold Apple II computers, like really early in Chicago. We sold them before there were disk drives, and it was the 16K machine. It was $1,000 for a machine with 16,000 bytes of memory, and each additional 16K was $100. It came in a tube, and you had to like plug the chips in. Way cool. And then eventually there was a disk drive, and that was good. But there was a guy there named Chris Oberth who made a series of really nifty games that used the high-res routines. And I was involved with him. And then I'll tell you a real quick story about Clone. Has anybody ever heard of Clone? Virtually nobody, unless you came to the show in Vegas, have ever heard of Clone. Clone was done by a woman programmer named Elaine Ditton. It was her first video game. Marvin Glass was a toy manufacturer who had created a video game creation division. And they made Tapper and Domino Man and a few other games. And this was her first opportunity to make a game of her own. And the big idea around Clone was you take a video game in the public and merge that with the photo booth. Right, you know those booths where you go in, sit on the chair, the strobe goes off 3 times and you get a strip of pictures? Okay, so they merged those two things into a sit-down video game. And the video game was this sort of picture frame, and it had shooters on tops and bottoms, and you fly around, and your picture would be in there, 4 pictures, and it'd be animating through them. and you'd be shooting stuff. And then if you got the high score, then your picture would be in the boss enemy when he attacked the other people. Now this sounds like a good idea, right? Well, it lasted 4 days. And why is that?
Because you have no control of the content.
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, it's for the same reason that high score tables only had 3-character input for a long time. Because it's really hard to be obscene in 3 characters. This was the problem. Within a week, this thing was placed out in a suburb of Chicago in Palatine in Aladdin's Castle, which was a division of Bally Midway. And the operator said, you gotta come and take this thing away. Because some precocious, good-playing kids had immediately dropped their pants, and that's what they had taken their picture of, animating back and forth in 4 pictures. So when the big boss enemy came out, so that's what clone was. But Elaine is in this presentation, that's why I mention it. There's a sound effect there. Okay. Action Graphics. Now all these things come together at Action Graphics. Action Graphics was a video game company created to take the assets from the Astrocade, all those games that had been done for that failed game console, and port them to the new coming game consoles, like the 2600, and further out the ColecoVision, and maybe Intellivision or whatever. That was the idea, at least. So Action Graphics is the company. And these are some of the people from Action Graphics. Bob Ogden, the guy on the far right, was one of the principal programmers and leaders at Dave Nutting and Associates, who did Astrocade titles. So he was the one, the golden boy, who was handed these assets, which weren't worth all that much anyhow, and said, exploit them. John Perkins was this guy from the Army who had been there in technical development and had, finally retired, so he didn't really have to work. And he had done a game for that system, and he became the technical lead of this company. Then there's a guy in the back, John Joglis, who came from Rockola, who was the principal programmer on Nibbler, and he had joined us. And then way in the back there is me. And then the guy reaching for the potato chips was a business guy named Andy Bergman. He's not important, he's a business guy. So, if you're going to start one of these companies, you want to do video games. I think this is still true today, but probably less so because there's probably less of this work going on. Well, how do you do it? You do conversions. You have a title that's earning money on some platform. A publisher wants to earn money by porting it, converting it to other platforms. So the only 2600 title that I ever did sounds for was, and I bought this yesterday, converting this Astrocade title, programmed and designed by John Perkins, called Artillery Duel. And it was made into a double-ender cartridge for the 2600. It was Artillery Duel, and then I think on the other side was Chuck Norris fighting game. This cartridge, when I bought it at the table for $1, on the back says bad. But I asked the guy and he said, oh no, it just doesn't work. The other interesting thing about this was that when you see this game, this is 1977 take on something that shows up a lot later with touchscreens and stuff. It's really kind of a precursor to Angry Birds. Oh, okay, there you go. That's John on the left, and that's his charming wife, Karen, on the right, and she worked at Action Graphics too. It was kind of a family company. That's artillery duel. And it's kind of like Angry Birds, right? A little. I mean, you know, it's not as touchy, but I mean, basically from a distance, you determine an arc and some energy, and you launch a projectile. Okay. So now here I am, I've left coin-operated games, and I'm doing console games. And it's a similar activity, but a little bit different. On the right is the Gottlieb soundboard, and that's what I worked on when I was at Gottlieb. And it has its own processor, an own RAM, an own storage. It has an amplifier and a DAC and a whole lot of cabbage leaf capacitors and stuff. And it wasn't very good, but it was all mine. I owned that processor. And the game requested sounds to me by latching some numeric value into a port and strobing it. And then I would wake up and say, okay, make new sound. And that's very different than making console game sounds, because console game sounds are made with typically something like that, which is the General Instruments AY38910. Now, that's the Japanese game manufacturers and the ColecoVision and lots of other game systems use this chip because it was inexpensive. Now, all it did, it made a square wave at different pitches, and it made noise. It could make 3 of those square waves simultaneously under your control, and one, well actually, no, and a noise channel. So 4 simultaneous sounds. That's not really a big, rich palette to work from. Now, I learned really early that in console game development, as opposed to coin-op, the sound system is a beneficial parasite that eats CPU and makes sound. So I had to live in the smallest possible footprint in every way. Use the least amount of bytes to represent anything I was doing. Use the smallest amount of processor to do it. And stay out of the program's way, because if they're pedaling to the metal and have the graphics working, then they start running the sounds and the graphics go a little bit slower. Obviously the graphics halt. So, the very first thing that I did there after doing the 2600 was BeamWriter. Now, what platform was this on originally? Anybody know?
Television?
Correct. It was on the Intellivision. And it's a nifty game. It's kind of Tempest. It's kind of inspired by Tempest, you might say. We have things that ride on rails and come at you.
I bought that one yesterday.
Yeah, it's a nifty game. I was unfamiliar with it. I didn't own it in television. So we were hired by the publisher, by Activision, to port this game to the C64, the ColecoVision, and the Atari 400-800. Now, for a sound guy, each one of those systems has pretty radically, one of them has an AY38910, one of them has Pokey, which is the Atari sound chip, which is pretty nifty actually, and then the Commodore has SID. Everybody here knows what SID is, right? SID is, as in this time frame, really the coolest sound chip ever. It's like having not quite 3 mini-moogs under computer control. SID is very cool. So here's an example of how, when you do this, when you convert games like this, you're not trying to improve them so much as you're trying to, like a piano tuner, do no harm. You want to get them so that they play the same way and look the same way and sound the same way as they did on the original. That's your charter from the publisher. It's a neat game. Okay, so we did more conversions, right? You have to keep paying the bills. You have programmers to pay for and expensive development equipment to pay for. So we did For Activision, we converted Decathlon and Pitfall to the ColecoVision, and I forgot, the Atari 400 or something. After you do that long enough, you prove to the publisher that you're organized and you can deliver and you're technically competent, and you pitch them original games, or they have something, a license or some other game that they wanted to extend and they want a new original product. We pitched them Pit Stop, which was a driving game with a little difference. And the native development was done to make a ColecoVision version of it. And of course the ColecoVision has the wonderful square wave chip, and so this is how this version sounds. Now that bunk sound is cars colliding. One of the strategic elements that tries to separate this game from other driving games is your tires take damage. And when a tire finally blows, of course you're out of it. So it's called Pit Stop because after your tire takes enough damage, you have to go and do a costly pit stop to fix your tire, and maybe you lose the race because you were off changing tires because you have unwisely been hitting too many cars. Pit Stop was converted to the C64 by Jamie Fenton. Actually, he was Jay Fenton when he did it, but now he's Jamie. And Richard Ditton designed the pit game, where you go into the pit. And Richard Ditton's an important character in all this. This is the C64 version. So somebody's putting gas in, and so you multitask, but you gotta get back to him before he overflows the tank, or the car will burst into flames. And meanwhile, cars are, you're getting further and further on. And in that case, he only changed the most damaged tires. He only changed 2 because they needed to get back out on the road. So there was a slight strategic element to this. It was fun. Okay. The next original game we did was by somebody. It was, again, his first game ever, and it was called Rock and Bolt, and publisher was Activision, and the native version was done on the ColecoVision. Carl wanted music to play all the time, and when you have 3 voices, well, if you can only make 3 things at a time, it's really kind of hard to make music. Anyhow, and then of course there's all kind of game sounds that want to happen on top of that music. So I came up with a scheme where I sort of interleaved them. Basically I played music all the time, but I would steal resources to play the sound effects, and it's sort of a sleight of hand. So if I do it right, you don't notice. So it sounds like I have more channels than I do. And it worked pretty well. It didn't work as well on this chip as it did on the C64. It's kind of a puzzle game. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see the pattern he's trying to achieve. And then you get extra money based on how much time left over. So there's a time element too. You want to do it as quickly as possible. Okay, the C64 conversion was done by a guy named John Joglis. He's the one on the right. Okay, it's a joke. And the C64 version, the SID chip is really neat because it's like a write-only RAM chip, which in most cases would not be useful. only be able to write into a RAM chip. But in this case, when you write into SID, it controls what sound it's going to make, but you can't read back numbers that you've previously written. So you have to keep versions of whatever you've written to it in memory. Well, that allows you to steal channels, because you can be writing to it like crazy for the music, but if you need to steal a channel, you just write new values into it, and because you know you've stolen that channel, you don't write the music values into that channel. And then as soon as you're done with the sound effect, then you resume writing music values into that channel. So because you can write to it so fast, like a RAM chip, which isn't always true for sound chips, you can do this pretty gracefully. So it's hard to tell that I'm doing this, and yet you'll hear 2 and 3 sound effects going on top of 3-voice music. Okay, I mentioned Richard he did the pit scene. Well, Epix, who was one of our clients, I think they became a client on, or we'd done some conversion work for them. They had already done an Olympic game. I don't know, it's called Olympics or something. And so they had the licenses. And so then they wanted to expand to a Winter Games thing. So they tapped us, and we got to design 6 or 7 new events, winter-themed events. And Richard was the primary programmer. He did most of this. And Richard, when he graduated from Purdue, immediately was hired by IBM and went down to Florida and worked on the shuttle launch software for the first space shuttle that went up. And once they launched one, he was happy and left and came to Chicago and joined Marvin Glass and started programming games. And there he met his wife, Elaine, and both Richard and Elaine ended up in Action Graphics. So he truly is a rocket scientist. And he did Winter Games for the C64. This is native implementation. And those birds in the ports, sometimes when we were working on it, they'd fly too low, like right into the flames. And we called them flame turkeys. I'll just play a few of the events. Now, one of the things music can really do for these games, and maybe I'm pointing out the obvious, but music is really good at drama. So for this event where you're goofing with gravity and have sticks tied to your feet and you're going down this ramp and launching yourself into space, I mean, you know, I think there's drama there. So. Oh yeah, sorry, and we only play that music. I mean, you can cancel out of that anytime. We don't force you to endure the drama every time. It's just kind of like maybe the first time you listen to it and go, ooh, I'm doing something heroic. Okay, we had figure skating as events, both freestyle and the other one. And so I went to like public domain for the classic skating. And then I got to write a tune for the freestyle stuff, because they usually play, you know, more current things. Now, the bobsled, from a Midwestern perspective, is like really scary. You know, first off, it's mostly flat where I lived, and purposely taunting gravity in an ice tube on a sled seemed like a crazy thing to me. So I frequently write like lyrics that nobody ever hears to make these tunes hang together. And so I'm going to show you the lyrics for this one. But if anybody is like a relative of some Olympic winter athlete who is really, you know, is convinced of this is the right thing to do, I apologize in advance. I would play it again so we could all sing along, but we've got to move this presentation along. Let's see. Now, the problem with Action Graphics and their business model, well, there's two problems. One is they weren't a publisher. They were a game developer. Publishers are where the money is. You know, money is a river that runs, and whoever's the closest who can dip their bucket into the river ends up with the most money. Developers are way far away from the river. And the model is, for game developers, particularly making an original product, is to give you just enough money to pay, keep you alive, and then should you hit one out of the park, then you might make some money on royalties after. It's the same model that record companies have, right? Except video game companies can't go out on the road to make up the difference. So you're living hand to mouth all the time as a video game developer. And the problem with this is this box right here. That's an HP CPU emulator. So the way game development was done at Action Graphics for the programmers is whatever thing you were working on, if it was a ColecoVision or a C64, you'd take a screwdriver, pop the cover off that baby, pull out the CPU, and plug a pod in from this thing into it. Now, that's great for a software developer, because now you have all the power of this thing to set breakpoints and stop it at any point, and look at registers and interrogate things. It's really good for development. But we were renting these things. We had like 10 or 12 of them, one for every programmer, and the monthly nut to pay for these things was exorbitant. So they weren't very smart about that. You know, it's very disappointing. There's a sound effect for that, and it sounds like bubbles and things going under. But in any case, Action Graphics went under while we were working on winter games. And we went through this calculus where it was probably better to finish winter games instead of walking out in a huff, because then we wouldn't get any money, because Epix wouldn't pay Action Graphics anything for an incomplete project. So Richard and me and Elaine and everybody else trudged on for months and finished winter games and delivered it to Epix. And it was a big success. Anybody ever played winter games? People know it, right? Yeah? Okay, well, that's part 2. So what do you do when you haven't been paid for a few months and you don't have any investment capital or any chance of it? You're just developers, you know. You don't have any story that you can sell to investors. You don't have any clients, what do you do? You start a writing company, which we did. There you go. And so that's Richard Ditton and his wife and me. And we started Incredible Technologies. Actually, it wasn't called Incredible Technologies originally. Elaine Ditton was a chemist in her background. And the way the thing came together, she called the company Free Radical Software. And if you talk to Richard, he'll say it was because his initials are RAD, so it was Free Radical, depends who you talk to. But in any case, our company name was Free Radical Software. This is a note for any of you starting a video game company is a bad idea. Okay, so how do we start a new game company? We do conversions. We had connections. We knew Epix. Epix knew us. And Epix wanted to port Winter games from the C64 to everything. If it stood still, they wanted a Winter Games port on it. And we did these personally. More ports were done. We didn't do the Nintendo port, I don't believe. But somebody did. This thing was ported like 12 times. It's crazy. I personally did the Atari ST port, because when you start a small company, you move outside your comfort zone and you do whatever it takes, even if that's sweeping floors. So I did that. And those are screen grabs from some of the different versions. You can see that the systems at that time, the PC could make 4 colors. Pretty cool. Okay, this is the Amiga port. And now we've got a new sound chip in town. The Amiga was a far superior technologically superior system compared to what we've been working on. And it's a small world. I worked at Gottlieb, and the guy in the Milestar t-shirt, Gottlieb changed its name to Milestar, is Matt Householder, and the guy next. And so I knew Matt from way back, and he was working, that's the Atari ST system guys who are making our Atari ST system ROM. And the guy next to him is Jim Eisenstein. And I met him because he was the graphics guy, and he taught me how the sprite routines worked, so I could port the Atari ST version. It's a small world. Because the next thing we knew, Matt Householder was a program manager at Epix. And he was the one interfacing with us when we pitched them a new product. We pitched them Championship Wrestling. That says, this was a mail that Matt sent to me. Championship Wrestling. I have a couple of beach towels in my archives. I remember that IT, NE Free Radical Software, pitched Epix with 1 female wrestler in the mix, and that Epix sales department nixed her. Sad but true. So this was an FRS original. Epix wouldn't put Free Radical Software on the box. Now, we thought it was about chemistry. They obviously thought it was about something else. That's noble in the same way that, like, the Black Knight is noble, right? It's wrestling, come on. Every wrestler had their own song when they were introduced to the match. This is the Russian. Okay. Then we got in contact with a new client who were doing Amiga games. They had done Defender of the Crown, and they had gotten a hold of the, from Columbia Pictures, the Three Stooges license. So we did Three Stooges.
Hey, this looks like a kid's game.
QA
So it's a huge leap, particularly in sound, because the Amiga is based on samples. So you can play anything that you can sample. You don't have much space to hold it, but you can do a lot of tricks. Tim Skelly, that guy from the very beginning, now worked for us. And a guy named Bill Zielinski, this was his first video game. And if you look at the back, you'll see the two of them. They're the trainers for Curly. They really put themselves into this game. Restaurant. This is the hospital. You're supposed to pick up those medical supplies that are being dropped by the cart and not hit the people in the crutches. And one of my favorites from an episode, this is Curly versus the oyster. Without slapping. And by doing the slapping right, you slowed down menu selection, so you had a better chance at choosing the game elements you wanted to play. And you have to throw pies. Well, that was our first Amiga. The second Amiga, we had some experience, and Disney tagged us to do an original game based on their DuckTales license, and they wanted it in 3 simultaneous versions, Amiga, PC, and C64, which is just insane because those platforms couldn't be more different, even though it's the same game. But this is a little bit from the Amiga. Okay, and I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick. Let's jump 24 years forward. Talk about some of the things. I still do this for a living. Sound memory, things happened, right? When I was working back in the old days, I had 2,000 bytes of memory for everything. Sound system, the tables, everything. When I was doing that Amiga stuff, typically my share of chip memory would be about 25K. In 2006, when I started doing pinball again, my memory space was roughly 25,000. So, you know, when the basis of your work changes so radically, you have to learn a whole new dance. So, the bobsled team, which you heard, took 250 bytes to represent in the C64. If I were doing it now, I would just record it, I would do a thing in my MIDI studio and make it, and then represent it with a little compression. It would take more space, but it would sound different. audience, it may lose some 8-bit charm. I kind of like it. I'm just a sound guy, you know. Okay, so then when I returned after 7 years of not doing game stuff, I returned back to pinball, and I've done a bunch of pinball since 2006. I'll just show you a couple things. Down in the show, 4 of the games that I've done are here in that pinball thing, and Pirates of the Caribbean, Avatar, Tron, and I'm still working. I've got to write one more tune for Star Trek, but they are selling them. It's the way they do it. They sell you the machine, and then they keep giving you new software.
Who's gonna protect me from the evil monkey in my closet? Alright, in my closet. Holy crap, no! I'm Chris. Hey, Twinkie!
I like that one. I had a lot of fun. I singing Evil Monkey, and then Chris, the guy who does the voice talent, well, he didn't cooperate with us. I just got to pull things off the show, and then I time and pitched them and did a mashup and made that. That was a lot of fun. We did a Transformers game, and I wrote a lot of music for this. It was really fun because it was based on the comic books, not the TV shows and not the cartoon shows and not the movies. So I had a kind of a clean slate to my take on these evil guys and these heroes made out of metal. I think this is the bad guy. That's the bad guy. Thing, after 17 years, the last video game that I had done for Coin-Op was something called Time Killers. It was a competitor of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. It was a kid game. It featured enormous amounts of fluid, lots of blood. You got to chop off limbs and heads, and it was way cool. I hadn't done a video game since then. That was 1993. So now I'm back on the I've worked with these guys, and for Android and the iOS platform, we did something called Attack of the Wall Street Titan, basically based on the 99% getting back at the 1%. And the goal is to take the suits, who look like 1980s game characters, little white shirt guys, and you smush them because you're angry. And basically the story is that the bad guys created the robot, and then the 99%, a hacker hacks the robot so that we can take control of it and smush the bad guys. And this is handheld or iPad. Good points for smashing the suits. If you smash civilians, you get bad points. And this is for free with, you know, those advertising things and stuff on both of those stores right now. So I encourage you, because that's the only way I make money off of this. I did this for fun. And I want to thank first this group for inviting me to come. It's been very educational and interesting for me. Then I want to thank all those YouTube guys who've taken these old games and either on emulators or the real hardware have shot videos of these games. There wasn't a game that I have done on however obscure a platform that I couldn't find a video of. And that's where I got all my stuff. Because I don't have any of these platforms, but it was fabulous. So if anybody who's ever posted one of those, or you recognize the one you posted and I used it, thank you ever so much. I didn't get explicit rights to use it, but we're all friends here. And then the classic gaming websites, which helped me do the research because I can barely, you know, I'm 63, I can barely remember the last thing I was doing last week, and I write everything down. So going back 30 years to remember, what did I even, oh God. The classic gaming websites were incredibly useful for helping me put this talk together. And Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I want to thank everybody, and thank you guys for your enthusiasm. It really, like I said at the beginning of the talk, when I was doing this work, the corporation tried to keep me away from you people, from everybody. They just wanted me to stay in a hole, slip pizza under the door, and make games. And I, as a musician, I was not used to being so isolated from my audience. You know, at least in coin op, when we put the games out, we knew from the coin drop whether they were liked or not. But when we started doing home games, you're really far away from your audience. So here it is 30 years later, and there's a new audience, and they're digging it, and I'm loving it. So thank you so much. I think we're almost out of time, but...
It's really quick. When you're designing your office, has anybody ever thought of a plug for headphones?
Oh,
Because all the beautiful music is being lost in your face.
please. Actually, when I was at IT, I was a vice president, so I had some leeway to do things. And I actually designed a product called Hear It. And it was an aftermarket thing. You drill a little hole in your game, and you could put a little plastic thing, a metal thing that had an 1/8" stereo jack and a volume control, because you need that because all headphones aren't equally sensitive. And you could retrofit any game to put a headphone jack on it, you know. And we just got zero traction. Nobody wanted this. And the first thing everybody says is, well, they'll stick gum in it. Well, they'll stick gum in the coin slot. They'll stick gum in their ear. I mean, you know, what can you do? But yeah, headphone jacks are a great way to deal with it. And I'm always, as a sound guy, it's bittersweet to go to any public space, even here where the games are being operated, because it's more like a disco show in terms of audio than it is about any of the games, because you can't hear any of them. So yeah, headphones are one thing to do. I've always wanted to suggest that, you know, on an Expo thing that they have an audio 2 hours, right, where they turn off the disco, and then they take every other game and turn it down, right, so that at least half the games can be heard, and for 2 hours. I mean, you announce it. Okay, now we're going to have audio time. So that people can hear the games, because people who play the games when they can hear them. I mean, people who play home games know the importance of audio, but in public spaces, boy, you work really hard and you test them in a quiet space and you know the cues are working. Then you get out there and, like, at Star Trek, the only sound that's surviving so far are the sounds on the pop bumpers, where you got that bing, bing, you know, the laser things. Okay. Yes, we have thought of it. I've thought about it. But audio guys, you know, don't get that much traction. I jump up and down, hold my breath, threaten, if you don't put audio jacks in these games, we'll shoot this dog. Okay. Thank you so much.